There are some doors you believe will always be open. Some voices you think you'll always hear. Thomas Bennett stood at his childhood front door with a key that no longer mattered, staring at a silence that would haunt him forever. He had finally come home. But he was 3 days too late. The autumn rain fell softly on Maple Street, the kind of gentle October drizzle that makes everything look like an old photograph. Thomas's hand trembled as he touched the weathered blue paint of the door he'd walked through 1,000 times as a boy. The brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head, still hung exactly where it always had. His father had polished it every Sunday morning without fail. His father. The funeral was yesterday. Thomas had missed it. He'd missed everything. He pushed the door open slowly, and the familiar creak sang out like a ghost welcoming him back. The smell hit him immediately. Old Spice aftershave, coffee that had been brewing since dawn, and something else. Something that could only be described as home. That indefinable scent that every house carries, the one you don't notice until you've been away too long. The living room looked frozen in time. His father's reading chair sat by the window, a pair of glasses folded neatly on the armrest. A book lay open, face down, marking a page that would never be finished. The indent in the cushion was still there, holding the shape of a man who would never sit there again. Thomas was 47 years old. A successful corporate lawyer in Manhattan. He owned a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. He drove a car that cost more than his father had earned in 5 years. He wore suits that required 2 weeks advance notice to tailor. And he had not been home in 9 years. Not since the argument. The one that had carved a canyon between them that neither knew how to cross. It had been about something so trivial that now Thomas could barely remember the details. His father had criticized Thomas's divorce, saying he was throwing away his family for his career. Thomas had fired back that his father wouldn't understand ambition, that he'd spent his whole life as a high school English teacher in a small town, never taking risks, never dreaming bigger. The words had hung in the air like poison. "You think you're better than this place," his father had said quietly, his voice breaking in a way Thomas had never heard before. "You think you're better than me." "Maybe I am," Thomas had replied. He'd regretted the words before they'd finished leaving his mouth, but pride had sealed his lips shut against an apology. His father had simply nodded, turned away, and walked into his study. Thomas had left the next morning. That was 9 years ago. 9 years of phone calls that lasted less than 5 minutes. 9 years of Christmas cards with no personal message, just a signature. 9 years of "I'm too busy and maybe next month and we'll see." 9 years of building a wall, brick by brick, phone call by phone call, until the distance felt permanent. And then, 3 days ago, the call had come. Not from his father. It was too late for that. From Mrs. Henderson next door, her voice gentle but firm. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. Your father passed away yesterday morning. Quietly in his sleep. The funeral is tomorrow at 2. Thomas had been in a meeting. A merger worth $40 million. He looked at his calendar and seen the depositions, the court dates, and the client dinners. He'd thought, "I'll go after. I'll go next week. I'll arrange everything properly." But somewhere between the conference call and the contract signing, something inside him had broken. He'd walked out of the office, driven to the airport, and bought a ticket. He'd arrived this morning, 20 hours after they'd lowered his father into the ground. The house whispered around him as he moved through it. Every step was a memory. The third stair that creaked. The light switch in the hallway always stuck. The kitchen where his father had taught him to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, letting him crack the eggs even though he always got shells in the batter. Thomas found himself drawn to his father's study. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He pushed it open and stopped breathing. The room was exactly as he remembered it. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, classics, poetry, and novels with cracked spines from being read and reread. His father's desk sat beneath the window, papers neatly stacked, a coffee mug still sitting on a coaster. The mug said "World's Best Dad" in faded letters. Thomas had given it to him for Father's Day when he was 12. But it was the wall behind the desk that made Thomas's knees buckle. Photographs. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Every surface was covered. And every single one was of Thomas. Thomas as a baby, held in his father's young, strong arms. Thomas's first day of school, missing his 2 front teeth. Thomas in his Little League uniform, holding a trophy. Thomas at his high school graduation, his father's arm around his shoulder, both of them beaming. But it didn't stop there. There were newspaper clippings from Thomas's college years, his name in the dean's list announcements. A printed article about his first big case as a lawyer. A photograph that looked like it had been cut from a firm's website, showing Thomas receiving an award. His father had been following him, tracking his life from a distance, collecting proof of his son's success like precious artifacts. Thomas's vision blurred. His throat tightened. On the desk, he spotted a calendar. His father's handwriting marked various dates. Doctor's appointments, book club meetings, grocery shopping reminders. And there, circled in red ink on dozens of Sundays throughout the years, a simple note was repeated: call Thomas. Some had check marks. Most didn't. Thomas picked up the calendar with shaking hands. He flipped back through the months. The years. The circled Sundays went back as far as the calendar did. Every week, his father had reminded himself to call. Every week, he'd hoped his son might have time to talk. How many of those calls had Thomas let go to voicemail? How many times had he returned with a hurried text, busy? Talk later? A notebook sat beside the calendar. Brown leather, worn at the edges. Thomas recognized it. His father had carried notebooks like this his whole life, jotting down thoughts, quotes, and observations. He'd called them his thinking books. Thomas opened it, and his father's familiar handwriting swam before his eyes. The entries weren't dated, but they were clearly recent. The handwriting was shakier than he remembered, the letters not quite as precise. Thomas called today. Only for a minute, but he sounded well. Tired, maybe? I wanted to ask him about his health, if he's eating properly, and if he's happy. But I didn't. I'm afraid if I ask too many questions, he won't call again. So I just listened to his voice and told him I was proud of him. I'm not sure he heard me before he had to go. Thomas's hand covered his mouth. He couldn't remember that call. Couldn't remember any specific call. They'd all blended together in his mind, brief obligations checked off a mental list. He turned the page. I drove past the old baseball field today. Remembered teaching Thomas to catch. He was so small, the glove was almost bigger than he was. He'd get frustrated when he missed, but he never gave up. That's what I loved most about him, his determination. I see it paid off. I just wish I could tell him I understand now why he had to leave. Why he had to build something bigger than this small town could hold. I'm not angry anymore. I just miss my boy. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Thomas sank into his father's chair and wept like he hadn't wept since he was a child. Great, shuddering sobs that shook his whole body. He'd been so sure. So certain that his father didn't understand him, didn't approve of him, and didn't care about the life he'd built. He'd carried that certainty like armor, using it to justify every missed visit, every shortened phone call, and every too busy excuse. But he'd been wrong. His father had understood, had forgiven him, had been proud of him all along. And Thomas had never known because he'd been too wrapped up in his own pride, his own hurt, and his own carefully constructed narrative of disappointment to simply ask. He turned more pages, reading entry after entry. Some were mundane observations about the weather, about books his father was reading, and about students he'd taught years ago who still stopped by to visit. But woven through them all were thoughts about Thomas. Worries about his health. Questions about whether he was happy. Memories of who he'd been as a boy. Hope that someday they'd find their way back to each other. My doctor says I should tell Thomas about the diagnosis. But what would that accomplish except to make him worry or, worse, feel obligated to come home? I don't want him here out of duty. I never did. I just want him here because he wants to be. Because he remembers that I love him, even if I wasn't always good at showing it in the ways he needed. Thomas's blood went cold. Diagnosis. What diagnosis? He flipped frantically through the rest of the notebook, looking for more information. The entries became shorter and more sporadic. The handwriting is more difficult to read. 6 months, they say. Maybe less. I'm not afraid. I've had a good life. Taught hundreds of students. Read thousands of books. Loved a good woman who gave me a son I'm proud of. My only regret is that Thomas and I never fixed what broke between us. But maybe that's okay. Maybe he needed to break away to become who he was meant to be. I just hope he knows I never stopped being his father. Never stopped loving him. Never stopped waiting for him to come home. The notebook ended there. The last page. The last words his father had written. Thomas sat in that chair as the afternoon light faded, holding his father's notebook like a lifeline. The house settled around him, creaking and sighing like a living thing mourning its owner. His father had been sick. For 6 months, maybe more. And he hadn't told Thomas because he didn't want to force a reunion. Didn't want his son to come home out of obligation. And Thomas? Thomas had been too busy. Too important. Too wrapped up in mergers and depositions and client dinners that didn't matter. It wouldn't matter in a year, or 5 years, or at the end of his own life. He thought about the last time they'd spoken. 2 weeks ago? 3? A brief call while Thomas was in a taxi, heading to another meeting. His father had sounded tired, but Thomas had attributed it to age, not illness. The conversation had lasted maybe 90 seconds. How are you, Dad? Oh, fine. Just fine. How about you? You sound busy. Always busy. Listen, I'm heading into a meeting. Can I call you back? Of course. You go ahead. I love you, son. Had Thomas said it back? He couldn't remember. The words might have been automatic, thrown over his shoulder as he ended the call. Or maybe he hadn't said them at all. Maybe he just said, "Talk soon," and hung up. He'd never know now. That last conversation was lost in the blur of 1,000 identical conversations, none of them significant enough to remember. Except now it was the last one. And he couldn't get it back. Thomas stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting. He walked to the wall of photographs and studied each one carefully, seeing them now through different eyes. These weren't just pictures. They were proof. Evidence of a love that had never wavered, even when Thomas had convinced himself it had. His father had been proud of him, had followed his career, had celebrated his successes from afar, had never stopped hoping that his son would come home. And Thomas had been too blind to see it. As evening settled over the house, Thomas continued exploring, no longer with the detachment of someone inventorying a stranger's belongings but with the desperate attention of someone searching for lost pieces of himself. In his father's bedroom, he found more evidence of a life lived quietly but fully. Books stacked on both nightstands, poetry by Robert Frost and Mary Oliver, novels by authors Thomas had never heard of. A journal dedicated to tracking birds that visited the backyard feeder. Meticulous notes about cardinals and blue jays and finches, complete with dates and times and behaviors observed. His father had always loved birds. Thomas remembered that now, a memory surfacing like something rising from deep water. On Saturday mornings when Thomas was young, his father would wake him at dawn to sit quietly in the backyard and watch the birds arrive. Thomas had been impatient then, wanting to play, wanting action. He hadn't understood the gift his father was offering, the gift of stillness, of attention, of noticing the small miracles that happened every day when you simply paid attention. In the closet, Thomas found his father's clothes hanging neatly. Flannel shirts worn soft from decades of washing. Khaki pants with the cuffs carefully hemmed. A single suit, navy blue, probably bought for Thomas's college graduation and preserved for special occasions that came too rarely. And in a box on the top shelf, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, every Father's Day card Thomas had ever made as a child. Construction paper folded in half, decorated with crayon drawings and stickers. Inside, messages in a child's handwriting. I love you, Daddy, you're the best dad ever. And thank you for teaching me stuff. Thomas sat on the floor of the closet, surrounded by his father's clothes that still smelled faintly of laundry detergent and Old Spice, and read those cards one by one. He'd been so free with love then. So certain. So uncomplicated in his affection. When had that changed? When had love become something conditional, something that required perfection to maintain? He found his old bedroom next, untouched since he'd left for college decades ago. Posters of bands he'd loved were still on the walls. Trophies from high school debate competitions lined up on a shelf. His old desk, where he'd written papers and studied for tests, still held a cup of pencils that had never been sharpened. But what stopped him cold was the bed. It was made with fresh sheets. Hospital corners, exactly the way his father had taught him. The pillows were fluffed. A blanket was folded at the foot. The room had been kept ready. All these years, his father had kept this room ready for Thomas to come home. In the desk drawer, Thomas found more treasures. Report cards from elementary school with his father's handwritten notes. So proud of you. And knew you could do it. Letters Thomas had written home during his first year of college, full of excitement about his classes and new friends. His father had kept them all, tied together with string. And at the bottom of the drawer, an envelope. Thick, cream-colored paper. His name was written on the front in his father's handwriting, but steadier than the notebook, as if this had been written earlier, when the illness hadn't yet taken its toll. Thomas's hands shook as he opened it. My dear Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've forgiven me for not telling you I was sick. I made Mrs. Henderson promise not to call you until after the funeral. I didn't want your last memory of me to be in a hospital bed, weak and diminished. I wanted you to remember me the way I was, your father, imperfect but loving you with everything I had. I've been thinking a lot about our last real conversation. The argument. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times over these 9 years, and I want you to know something. You weren't wrong. You said I never took risks, never dreamed bigger than this small town. You were right. But you know what? I don't regret that. This town was exactly the size my dreams needed to be. Every Monday morning, I stood in front of 30 teenagers and tried to show them that words matter, that stories matter, and that paying attention to life is itself a kind of success. Some of them got it. Most didn't. But enough did that I felt like my life meant something. You, though. You were always meant for bigger things. Even when you were small, you had this fire in you. This need to prove yourself, to achieve, to build something significant. I saw it, and I was proud of it, even when I didn't know how to say so. When you left and didn't come back, I told myself it was because I'd failed you somehow. Failed to support your dreams, failed to understand your ambitions. I carried that guilt for a long time. But I realize now that you didn't leave because of me. You left because you had to. Because becoming who you were meant to be required distance from who you'd been. I understand that now. I forgive you for the distance. And I hope you can forgive me for not making it easier for you to bridge it. Here's what I want you to know, son. I was proud of you every single day. Every article I read about your cases, every mention of your name, every small piece of your life I could glimpse from afar, it filled me with joy. Not because of the success, though that was wonderful. But because I could see that you'd become exactly who you wanted to be. You didn't need to come home to make me proud. You never did. I was proud of you the day you were born, and that never changed. Not during the argument. Not during the years of silence. Not ever. But I miss you. God, I miss you. I miss the sound of your voice when it wasn't rushed. I missed asking you about your day and hearing real answers instead of one-word summaries. I missed the possibility that you might walk through that door on a Sunday afternoon just because you wanted to see your old man. I miss being your father in the small, daily ways. That's the part that hurt. I know you're busy. I know your life is important and full and demanding. I never blamed you for that. I just wish I'd been better at telling you that there was still a place for you here, in this small house, in this small town, whenever you needed it. Your room is ready. It's always been ready. I've left the house to you. Do with it whatever you need to: sell it, rent it, keep it. I don't care about the building. But there's something I hope you'll do before you decide. Sit in the living room for one evening. Just one. No phone, no laptop, no work. Sit in my chair and watch the sun set through that window. Let yourself be still for 1 hour. And notice what you notice. That's all I ask. Thomas, you've built a beautiful life. I hope it makes you happy. I hope you wake up most mornings feeling like it was worth it. The sacrifice, the distance, the cost of success. If you do, then I'm content. If you don't, then I hope you'll give yourself permission to change course. Life is too short to live according to someone else's definition of success. Even your own definition, if it was formed when you were too young to know what really matters. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you beyond death, in whatever comes next. And if there's no next, if this is all there is, then I still count my life a success because I got to be your father. Come home when you can. Not to this house. I don't mean that. Come home to yourself. To the parts of you that remember how to be still, how to notice birds, and how to sit with someone you love without checking the time. That's the son I remember. That's who I hope you'll find again. With all my love. Dad. P.S. In the attic, there's a box marked Thomas. Open it when you're ready. No rush. Thomas read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, until the words blurred together, and he had to stop because he couldn't see through his tears. His father's voice rang in every sentence, clear as if he were standing in the room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt both infinite and fleeting. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the autumn evening settled into that particular blue-gray light that makes everything look both melancholy and beautiful. Thomas found himself doing exactly what his father had asked. He walked to the living room, sat in his father's chair by the window, and simply looked out. The view was so ordinary it was almost painful. A suburban street in a small town. Houses with lights beginning to glow in windows. A neighbor walking a dog. A couple of kids racing bikes down the sidewalk, trying to squeeze in the last few minutes of play before dinner. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Just life, happening in its small, persistent way. But as Thomas sat there, his phone silent in his pocket, his mind empty of deadlines and obligations, something shifted. The view didn't change, but his way of seeing it did. He noticed the way the streetlights came on one by one, like someone lighting candles. He noticed the oak tree in the front yard, its leaves turning colors he couldn't have named but that were somehow perfect. He noticed the sound of distant laughter, children being called home, the bark of a dog, and the low hum of a car passing. He noticed he was breathing. When was the last time he'd been aware of his breath? When was the last time he'd sat somewhere without his laptop, without his phone in his hand, without his mind already 3 steps ahead planning the next task? He couldn't remember. An hour passed. Maybe more. Thomas didn't move to check. He just sat, and watched, and noticed. And gradually, something in his chest that had been clenched tight for years began to loosen. His father had lived here for 43 years. Had looked out this window thousands of times. Had watched seasons change, neighbors come and go, and children grow up and move away. Had found enough in this simple view to fill a life. Thomas had thought that was settling. Had thought his father's life was small, limited, and unremarkable. But sitting here now, he wondered, what if his father had been rich in ways Thomas had never learned to measure? As full darkness settled over the house, Thomas finally rose from the chair. His legs were stiff, but his mind felt clearer than it had in years. He climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, pulling the cord that lit the single bulb hanging from the rafters. The attic was surprisingly organized. Boxes labeled neatly, Christmas decorations, old tax records, and winter clothes. And in the corner, exactly as his father had said, a box marked Thomas in thick black marker. Thomas carried it down to the living room and set it on the coffee table. His heart was pounding. What could his father have left him that required this kind of privacy, this kind of timing? He opened the box. On top was a baseball. Not just any baseball. Thomas recognized it immediately. The ball from his first home run in Little League. His father had caught it in the stands, and Thomas had been so excited he jumped up and down on the pitcher's mound until his coach told him to run the bases. Beneath that, a stack of programs from school plays Thomas had been in. His father had attended every single one, sitting in the back row of the auditorium. Thomas had always scanned the crowd for him, and his father had always been there, beaming with pride even when Thomas forgot his lines. There were more artifacts of Thomas's childhood: a science fair ribbon, a dried corsage from prom, a graduation tassel, and a letter of acceptance to law school. All the milestones his father had witnessed and saved. But deeper in the box, Thomas found things he'd never seen before. A journal, different from the one on his father's desk. This one was older, the entries spanning decades. Thomas opened to a random page and read, "Thomas is 3 today. We had a party in the backyard. He insisted on wearing his Superman cape the whole time. When he blew out the candles, he wished out loud that he could fly. My wish was simpler, that I could be the kind of father who helps him believe he can." Thomas flipped to another entry years later. Thomas got into a fight at school today defending another kid from a bully. The principal called me in. I probably should have been sterner with him, but honestly, I was proud. He has a sense of justice, a need to stand up for what's right. I hope life doesn't beat that out of him. And another. Help Thomas with college applications tonight. His essay is about breaking free from small-town limitations. It hurt to read, but it's brilliant. He's going to get into every school he applies to, and he's going to leave, and I'm going to miss him every day for the rest of my life. But that's the job, raising them brave enough to leave you. Thomas read entry after entry, spanning his entire childhood and adolescence. His father had documented everything. Not just the big moments, but the small ones too. The day Thomas learned to ride a bike. The night he had nightmares and crawled into his parents' bed. The morning he left for college, how his father had stood in the driveway long after Thomas's car disappeared, crying in a way he thought no one saw. His father had seen him. Had really, truly seen him. Every version of him. And had loved them all. At the bottom of the box was an envelope. Inside, a letter addressed to Thomas, but the handwriting was different. Feminine. His mother's. Thomas's mother had died when he was 16, cancer, quick and brutal. He had clear memories of her, but they'd faded over the years, becoming more feeling than substance. The letter was dated just before she died. My sweet Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I won't be there for all the things I wanted to see. But I need you to know something about your father. He's not good with words, my love. He's not good at saying what he feels out loud. But he shows it in 1,000 small ways. The way he makes your favorite breakfast when you have a big test. The way he comes to every game, every performance, even when he's exhausted from work. The way he sits with you when you're upset, even if he doesn't know what to say. After I'm gone, he's going to need you. Not right away. He'll be strong for you first because that's who he is. But eventually, he's going to be lonely. He's going to miss having someone to take care of. Please don't forget him, Thomas. Please don't let the years and distance make you forget that he loves you more than anything in this world. Even when you fight, and you will fight, because you're both stubborn, remember that his love is constant. He will never stop being your father. Never stop being proud of you. Never stop waiting for you to come home. Don't make him wait too long. All my love. Mom. Thomas's body shook with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. They came from regret so profound it felt like drowning. His mother had known. Had warned him. And he'd forgotten. He'd let the years pass, let the distance grow, and let his pride and his ambition and his busy schedule erase the simple truths she tried to leave him. His father had waited. For 9 years he'd waited. And Thomas had made him wait alone. He thought about all the Sundays he could have come home. All the phone calls he could have answered. All the moments he could have shared if he'd just been willing to prioritize what actually mattered. He told himself he didn't have time. But that was a lie. He'd had time for client dinners that didn't matter. Time for golf games with colleagues he didn't even like. Time to scroll through his phone for hours, reading news that would be forgotten in a day. He'd had time. He just hadn't made time. And now time had run out. The thing about time is that it's always running out. We just don't believe it until it's gone. We live as if the people we love will always be there, always available, always willing to wait while we attend to more pressing matters. We live as if later is guaranteed. But it isn't. Thomas stayed in that living room all night, surrounded by the artifacts of his father's love. He read every page of every journal. He studied every photograph. He held that baseball until the leather was warm from his hand. And slowly, through the grief and the regret, something else emerged. A kind of clarity. His father's last gift to him wasn't the house or the journals or even the letter. It was the truth, delivered gently but firmly. Thomas had been living the wrong life. Or not the wrong life, exactly, but living it wrong. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to achieve. He had the career, the money, and the recognition. He'd proven himself 1,000 times over. But to whom? And for what? He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuinely happy. Not satisfied or successful or accomplished. Happy. The kind of happiness his father had described in his journals. The simple pleasure of watching birds, of reading a good book, of sitting with someone you love without needing to be anywhere else. The kind of happiness that came from being present instead of constantly racing toward the next achievement. Dawn broke slowly, light creeping across the floorboards of the living room. Thomas hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his father's chair, thinking, remembering, grieving, and gradually, planning. Dawn broke slowly, light creeping across the floorboards of the living room. Thomas hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his father's chair, thinking, remembering, grieving, and gradually, planning. At some point during the night, he'd made a decision. Not impulsively. He was too much his father's son for that. But with the same clarity his father must have felt when he chose this small town, this small life that had been, in its own way, immeasurably large. He picked up his phone for the first time in 12 hours. 73 unread emails. 22 missed calls. Texts from his assistant and his colleagues and clients demanding updates. He looked at them as if looking at artifacts from someone else's life. They seemed urgent but not important. Pressing but not meaningful. They were the accumulation of choices he'd made about who to be and what to value, and he realized he'd been choosing wrong. Or maybe not wrong. Maybe those choices had been right for the person he'd been. But they weren't right for the person he wanted to become. He composed an email to the senior partners at his firm. He kept it brief. Effective immediately, I'm resigning. I'll work with my cases to ensure proper transitions, but I won't be returning to the office. Thank you for the opportunities you've given me. I wish you all the best. He hesitated only a moment before hitting send. Then he called his assistant. Jennifer? It's Thomas. Listen, I need you to help me with something. I'm not coming back. I need you to coordinate with the partners on transitioning my cases. I'll be available by phone for questions, but I'm done. Jennifer, professional to the core, asked the logical questions. Was he sure? What about his clients? What about the cases only he could handle? They'll find someone, Thomas said quietly. They'll be fine. They don't actually need me. They just think they do. After he hung up, he walked through the house one more time. He wasn't seeing it as a place to sell or settle. He was seeing it as a home. His home. The place his father had kept ready for him, believing that someday Thomas would be ready to return. He thought about what his father had written, "Come home to yourself." That's what this was. Not moving backward or giving up. But choosing differently. Choosing what he'd lost somewhere along the way. Thomas spent the morning calling people he should have called years ago. Mrs. Henderson next door, who cried and said she'd been praying for him. His father's colleagues from the high school, who shared stories of his father's kindness, his humor, and his dedication. Former students who had become doctors and artists and teachers themselves, all carrying pieces of his father forward into their own lives. His father had touched so many lives in ways Thomas was only beginning to understand. Not through grand gestures or impressive achievements, but through steady, consistent presence. Through showing up. Through caring. Through being there. In the weeks that followed, Thomas began the work of building a different kind of life. He didn't sell the house. He moved into it. He packed up his Manhattan penthouse, sold most of his things, and came home to Maple Street. He kept his father's furniture, his father's books, and his father's chair by the window. He started teaching. The local high school needed a business law teacher, someone who could explain contracts and negotiations to seniors preparing for college. Thomas had never taught a day in his life, but he remembered his father's journals and the joy he'd found in helping young people understand that knowledge was power. Thomas wasn't his father. He didn't have the same gentle patience, the same natural gift for metaphor. But he had experience to share, and he discovered that 18-year-olds asked surprisingly good questions when you treated them like they mattered. He learned their names. All of them. He learned which ones were struggling at home, which ones worked night shifts to help their families, and which ones had dreams bigger than this small town could hold. And instead of seeing that ambition as something that required distance, he tried to nurture it while also teaching them something his father had known and he'd forgotten. You could be ambitious and present. Successful and grounded. You didn't have to sacrifice one for the other. He started attending town council meetings. He joined his father's book club. He volunteered at the library. He learned the names of his neighbors and actually talked to them. Not hurried exchanges but real conversations about their lives, their families, and their hopes. He bought a bird feeder and hung it in the backyard. He bought a journal and started keeping track, just like his father had. Chickadees and cardinals and blue jays. He learned to identify their calls. He learned to sit still and wait for them to arrive. He learned to be present. Gradually, the knot in his chest that had been there for years, the constant anxiety, the relentless drive, the feeling that he was never doing enough, began to ease. Not disappear entirely, but soften into something he could live with. Something that didn't control every waking moment. Thomas discovered rhythms he'd forgotten existed. The way Saturday mornings felt when you didn't have to check your email. The satisfaction of cooking a real meal instead of ordering takeout at your desk. The simple pleasure of reading a book for no reason other than enjoyment, not to stay current with trends, not to impress clients with cultural references, but just because the story was good. He found his father's collection of poetry and started reading it. Frost, Oliver, and Whitman. Words about ordinary things, grass and snow and birdsong, that somehow contained entire philosophies about how to be human. One poem in particular, dog-eared and underlined, seemed to speak directly to him. It was Mary Oliver's The Summer Day, and his father had circled the final lines. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? His father had written in the margin, in that familiar handwriting, not what you'll achieve. What you'll do. How you'll spend the actual days. Thomas thought about how he'd spent his days for the past 20 years. Conferences and depositions and negotiations. Important-sounding work that vanished the moment it was done, leaving no trace except money in an account he rarely looked at. He thought about how his father had spent his days. Teaching teenagers about literature. Reading. Watching birds. Being present for his community. Loving his son from a distance because that's what his son seemed to need. Which of them had spent their one wild and precious life more wisely? Thomas wasn't sure anymore that the answer was what he once would have thought. 3 months after the funeral, Thomas received a letter. The return address was from Seattle, his ex-wife, Caroline. They'd been divorced for 8 years. The split had been civil but cold, both of them too hurt to be truly angry, just resigned to the fact that they'd wanted different things. Or more accurately, that Thomas had wanted his career more than he'd wanted a marriage. He almost didn't open the envelope. The past was the past, and he'd spent years carefully not thinking about what he'd given up in pursuit of success. But something made him tear it open. Dear Thomas, I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. I know you two had a complicated relationship, but I also know you loved him. I hope you're doing okay. I also heard, small-town networks are incredible, that you've moved back home. That you're teaching. That you've left the firm. I'll be honest, when I first heard, I thought you'd had some kind of breakdown. The Thomas the First knew would never walk away from that career. It was everything to you. More than everything. But then I remembered something. The night I told you I wanted a divorce, you asked me what you'd done wrong. And I didn't have a good answer because you hadn't done anything wrong, exactly. You'd just never been there. Not really. Your body was sometimes in the room, but your mind was always at work, always 3 steps ahead, always planning the next case. I told you then that I felt like I was competing with your career for your attention, and your career was always going to win. You looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Like you genuinely didn't understand what I meant. And that's when I knew we were done, because if you couldn't see it, I couldn't explain it. But now you've walked away from that career. You've chosen differently. And I can't help but wonder if you finally understand what I was trying to tell you. I'm not writing this to rehash old hurt or to suggest anything about us. We're past that, and I'm happy in my life now. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. For whatever that's worth coming from someone who's no longer in your life. It takes courage to admit you've been wrong. It takes even more courage to change. I hope you find what you're looking for there, in that small town you were always so desperate to escape. Take care of yourself, Thomas. Caroline. Thomas read the letter twice, then set it aside and stared out the window. Caroline had seen what he'd been blind to. His father had seen it. Everyone had seen it except him. He'd been so busy building a life he thought he wanted that he'd forgotten to live the life he actually had. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in years. His college roommate David, who'd become a social worker instead of joining Thomas in law school. Thomas had privately thought David was wasting his potential, settling for a career that paid a fraction of what they could have earned together. Now, Thomas wondered who had really been wasting what. The phone rang 4 times before David picked up. Thomas? Is that really you? Yeah. Yeah, it's me. Listen, I know it's been forever, but... Are you busy? Could we talk? They talked for 2 hours. David had a wife, 3 kids, and a modest house in Portland. He worked with foster children, helping them navigate a system that often failed them. He made less than Thomas had spent on suits, and he was happier than Thomas had ever been. I heard about your dad, David said gently. How are you holding up? Thomas paused, searching for the truth. I'm rebuilding. Trying to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my career. That's good, man. That's really good. You know, I worried about you. Back in school, you were so driven, so focused. I admired it, but I also wondered what you were running from. Running from? Or running toward? Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes we chase success because we're afraid that without it, we're not enough. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was doing. So are you enough now? Without the career, without the achievements? Thomas looked around his father's living room. At the books on the shelves, the photographs on the walls, and the bird feeder visible through the window. At the life his father had built from small, intentional choices repeated over decades. I'm learning to be, Thomas said quietly. Teaching, Thomas discovered, was nothing like practicing law. In law, you built arguments, won cases, and moved on to the next one. Success was binary, win or lose, guilty or innocent. But teaching was different. Teaching was planting seeds without knowing which ones would grow or when. It was showing up every day for kids who sometimes paid attention and sometimes didn't, trusting that something would stick somewhere. One student in particular reminded Thomas of himself at that age. Marcus Chin, a senior with straight A's and early acceptance to Yale. Marcus stayed after class one day to ask about corporate law, about the path Thomas had taken, and about how to build the kind of career Thomas had walked away from. Why did you leave? Marcus asked directly. If you were that successful, why give it up? Thomas could have given him an easy answer. But he thought about his father, about the truth his father had always tried to offer, and decided Marcus deserved the same. Because I confused achievement with meaning, Thomas said. I thought if I won enough cases, made enough money, impressed enough people, I'd finally feel, I don't know, satisfied, complete. But it doesn't work that way. Every achievement just made me hungrier for the next one. There was no finish line, no moment when I could say, this is enough. I was running a race that had no end. Marcus frowned. But you made a difference, right? You helped your clients. Some of them. But here's the thing, Marcus. My clients were corporations. I helped them win contract disputes, navigate mergers, and protect their bottom lines. It was intellectually challenging work, and it paid well, but at the end of the day, I wasn't helping people. I was helping entities. And entities don't remember you when you're gone. So you think I shouldn't go to Yale? Shouldn't you become a lawyer? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying make sure you know why you're doing it. If law is genuinely what you love, if justice matters to you in a way that makes you willing to sacrifice for it, then go. But if you're doing it because you think it's what success looks like, because you want to prove something to yourself or to others, then think carefully. Because you can spend your whole life climbing a ladder only to discover it's leaning against the wrong building. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Is that what happened to you? Yeah, Thomas said. That's exactly what happened to me. And I'm one of the lucky ones, because I figured it out while I still had time to do something about it. My father didn't get that chance. He tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. And by the time I was ready to hear him, he was gone. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and the simplicity of his compassion reminded Thomas that teenagers, despite their bravado, often saw more clearly than adults gave them credit for. Me too, Thomas said. But maybe I can make it mean something by helping you avoid the same mistake. So here's my advice. Before you commit to any path, ask yourself if it's taking you toward the life you actually want to live or just toward the life you think you're supposed to want. Those are very different things. Marcus nodded slowly, then asked, What life do you actually want to live? Thomas thought about that. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have had an answer. But now, one where I'm present, he said. Where I know my neighbors' names and show up for people who need me. Where I do work that might not be prestigious but that matters to the people it touches. Where at the end of my life, I can look back and see that I was actually there for it, instead of always planning for some future moment that never came. That sounds kind of ordinary, Marcus said carefully. Thomas smiled. Yeah, it does. But you know what I've learned? Ordinary isn't the opposite of meaningful. Some of the most meaningful lives ever lived looked very ordinary from the outside. My father taught high school English for 43 years in this town. Most people would consider that a small life. But he touched hundreds of students. He showed them that literature matters, that words have power, and that paying attention to life is itself a form of success. They remember him. They carry pieces of him forward. That's not small. That's actually pretty extraordinary. Winter came to Maple Street, and with it, a different rhythm. Thomas learned to appreciate seasons in a way he never had in Manhattan, where the changing weather was just an inconvenience that complicated transportation. Here, winter meant something. It meant quiet mornings watching snow fall on the bird feeder. It meant helping Mrs. Henderson shovel her driveway. It meant hot coffee and good books and time that moved differently, slower, and more intentionally. He found himself going through more of his father's things, not with the urgency of those first days, but with curiosity and care. Each box revealed something new about the man who'd raised him. In the basement, he discovered his father's old record collection. Vinyl albums carefully preserved, Mozart and Beethoven, but also Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel, and Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. Thomas set up the record player and listened to them one by one, imagining his father in this same room, listening to these same songs, finding whatever it was that music gave him. He found lesson plans dating back 30 years. His father's handwriting filled page after page with ways to make Romeo and Juliet relevant to teenagers, strategies for teaching poetry to students who thought they hated reading, and notes about individual students who needed extra attention or encouragement. The care in those plans astonished him. His father hadn't just been showing up for a paycheck. He'd been crafting experiences, building connections, and treating each class like it mattered. Because to him, it had. Thomas thought about his own work as a lawyer. How many late nights had he spent preparing for cases? Hundreds. Thousands, maybe. But had he ever brought that level of care, that depth of intention, to the people in his life? He knew the answer, and it shamed him. But shame, he was learning, could be transformative if you let it teach you instead of just making you feel bad. His father's life was teaching him, even now, even after death, about what it meant to live with intention, to show up fully, to care deeply about ordinary things. One evening in February, Thomas was grading papers when he heard a knock on the door. He opened it to find a woman about his age, someone vaguely familiar but unplaceable. "Thomas Bennett?" she asked. "Yes? I'm Sarah Mitchell. Well, Sarah Connors now. I don't know if you remember me. I was a few years behind you in school." Thomas did remember vaguely. Sarah had been one of his father's students. "I heard you were back," Sarah continued. "And I heard about your father. I wanted to come by and tell you, well, I wanted you to know what he did for me." She told him the story standing on the porch while snow began to fall. How she'd been failing English her junior year, convinced she was stupid, ready to drop out. How his father had stayed after school with her 3 days a week, not just tutoring her but talking to her, asking about her life, and treating her like she mattered. "He gave me a book," Sarah said. "Maya Angelou. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings." He said he thought I'd relate to it. And I did. It was the first book I'd ever read all the way through, cover to cover. And when I finished it, I went back to him and asked for another one. And then another one. Her eyes were wet with tears. "I'm a librarian now, Thomas. I run the children's section at the county library. I spend my days giving books to kids, trying to find that one story that will unlock something in them the way your father unlocked something in me. Everything I am professionally, I owe to him. And I never got to thank him properly before he died." Thomas invited her in for coffee. They talked for 2 hours. Sarah wasn't the only one, she told him. There was a whole informal network of his father's former students, people who'd stayed in touch with him over the years, who'd recognized that he'd given them something precious. "He changed lives," Sarah said simply. Quietly, without fanfare, one student at a time. He changed lives. After Sarah left, Thomas sat in his father's chair and wept again, but differently this time. Not from regret, though that was still there, but from awe. His father had built something Thomas was only beginning to understand. Not a career or a fortune or a reputation, but a legacy of human connection, of care, of showing up. And the beautiful thing about that kind of legacy was that it didn't require grand gestures or exceptional talent. It just required presence, consistency, the willingness to see people and care about them, day after ordinary day. Thomas could do that. He was doing it already, with his students, with his neighbors, with the life he was slowly, carefully building. Spring arrived with a softness that felt like forgiveness. The trees along Maple Street budded and bloomed. The birds returned to the feeder in greater numbers, and Thomas found himself recognizing them now, greeting them like old friends. He'd been home, really home, for 6 months. The longest he'd stayed in one place without travel for work in over a decade. And the strange thing was, he didn't feel trapped or stagnant. He felt grounded. His teaching contract had been extended for the following year. Several of his students had told him he'd made a difference. Marcus Chin, the Yale-bound senior, had come back after graduation and admitted that their conversation had changed his thinking. He was still going to Yale, but he decided to study public interest law instead of corporate. He wanted to do work that mattered to people, not just to balance sheets. "You did that," Marcus had said. "You made me think differently." Thomas had shaken his head. "No. My father did that. I'm just finally learning the lessons he tried to teach me. On a Saturday morning in early May, Thomas drove to the cemetery for the first time since he'd arrived home. He'd avoided it, unable to face the reality of his father's grave. But now he felt ready. The cemetery was peaceful, dappled with shade from old oak trees. Birds sang in the branches. Thomas walked slowly among the headstones until he found it. James Robert Bennett. Beloved father and teacher. 1947 to 2025. Thomas knelt in the grass, not caring that it dampened his jeans. He reached out and traced his father's name with his fingers. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I'm sorry about a lot of things, actually." The words came easier than he expected. He talked to his father for almost an hour, telling him everything. About reading the journals. About the letter. About moving home and teaching and learning to sit still. About the students whose lives he was trying to touch the way his father had touched Sarah's. "I understand now," Thomas said. "What you were trying to tell me. About success, about what matters. I get it. And I'm trying to live differently. I'm trying to be present the way you were present. I'm trying to build the kind of life you had, the kind I was too stupid and arrogant to see the value of." A breeze moved through the trees, and for a moment, Thomas let himself believe it was his father's way of responding. "I miss you," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I miss you so much. And I hate that I wasted 9 years we could have had together. But I promise you, Dad, I won't waste what's left. I won't waste the life I have left to live. I'll make it mean something. Not in the way I used to think meaning looked, but in the way you showed me. Through connections. Through presence. Through care." He stayed until the sun was high overhead, just sitting with his father, feeling closer to him than he had in years. Finally, he stood, brushed off his jeans, and turned to leave. As he walked back to his car, he noticed another grave nearby, with fresh flowers on the headstone. An elderly man sat beside it, talking quietly to his departed wife. Thomas recognized the gesture now and understood it. We talk to the dead not because we think they can hear us, but because we need to say the words. Because love doesn't end when life does. That evening, Thomas hosted his first dinner party. He'd invited Sarah the librarian, David from his book club, Mrs. Henderson, and a few other neighbors he'd gotten to know. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and good bread. But it was the first time Thomas had cooked for people without any agenda, without networking or client development in mind. Just food. Just company. Just the simple pleasure of sharing a meal. The conversation flowed easily. Stories about the town, about families, about small dramas and daily joys. Thomas found himself laughing more than he had in years. Real laughter, not the professional chuckle he'd perfected for client dinners. At one point, Sarah raised her glass. "To Thomas," she said, "for coming home. Your father would be proud." "To James," Mrs. Henderson added softly. Who knew the value of a good neighbor and a patient heart? They all drank, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest. He was part of something now. Part of a community, a web of connection and care. It wasn't impressive or prestigious. It wouldn't show up on a resume or win any awards. But it was real. And it mattered. After everyone left, Thomas cleaned up the kitchen slowly, washing each dish by hand even though he had a dishwasher. His father had always washed dishes by hand, saying it was meditative, a way to transition from day to evening. Thomas understood that now too. The small rituals that marked time, that created mindfulness, that turned ordinary tasks into something approaching meditation. As he dried the last plate and put it away, his phone buzzed. An email from his former firm. They were handling a major case, and they wanted his expertise. The consulting fee would be substantial, the email read. Just a few hours of your time. A few hours. That's all they wanted. And the money they were offering was more than a month of his teaching salary. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, he might have said yes. He told himself he could do both, keep one foot in his old life while building a new one. But Thomas recognized the temptation for what it was, the old hunger, The old belief that more was always better, that opportunity should never be declined, and that his worth was measured by his productivity and income. He deleted the email without responding. His worth wasn't measured by his productivity. His worth was inherent, given, not something he had to earn over and over again. His father had known that, had tried to teach him that. And Thomas was finally learning. Summer arrived, bringing long evenings and the scent of honeysuckle. Thomas's first school year ended with a small graduation ceremony. He watched his students receive their diplomas, saw their families cheer, and remembered being that age himself, full of certainty about how life would unfold. He'd been so sure then about what mattered, so confident that success meant escape, achievement, and recognition. He wondered what that younger version of himself would think of him now. Would he be disappointed? Probably. Would he understand? Not yet. But maybe someday. On the anniversary of his father's death, Thomas sat in the living room chair and watched the sun set, just as his father had asked in his letter. He'd done it dozens of times now, but tonight felt different. More intentional. More like a ritual of remembrance and commitment. The doorbell rang just as the sky was turning pink and gold. Thomas opened it to find Marcus Chin, the student he talked to about meaning and success. "Mr. Bennett," Marcus said, "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I wanted to show you something." He handed Thomas an envelope. Inside was a letter from Yale, informing Marcus that he'd been awarded a full scholarship for public interest law. At the bottom, Marcus had written, "Thank you for helping me choose the right ladder." Thomas's eyes stung with tears. "Marcus, this is wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I just wanted you to know," Marcus said. "That conversation we had changed my life. You probably don't even remember it, but I think about it all the time. It made me rethink everything." Thomas did remember it. Every word. Because it was the first time he'd taught something that really mattered, something beyond contracts and legal theory. "Your father taught you that, didn't he?" Marcus asked. "How to really see people. How to say the thing that needs to be said." "Yeah," Thomas said quietly. "He did. Though I didn't realize it until it was too late." "I don't think it's ever too late," Marcus said. "You're teaching me what he taught you. That's how it works, right? We pass things forward. The good stuff doesn't die with us. It keeps going." After Marcus left, Thomas returned to his father's chair and thought about that. The good stuff doesn't die with us. It keeps going. His father was gone, but his lessons were alive in Thomas. And Thomas was passing them to his students. And his students would pass them to others. On and on, a chain of care and presence and attention stretching forward through time. That was the real legacy. Not money or achievement or recognition, but the ways we shape each other, the truths we pass forward, and the small moments of connection that ripple outward in ways we can never fully trace. A year after his father's death, Thomas stood in front of his classroom on the first day of the new school year. A new crop of seniors looked back at him, some eager, some skeptical, all wondering what kind of teacher he'd be. "Before we talk about business law," Thomas said, "I want to tell you about my father." He told them the whole story. About the argument, the silence, the 9 wasted years. About coming home too late, finding the journals, and reading the letters. About the legacy his father had left, not in possessions but in lives touched, students changed, and moments of care extended day after day after day. "My father was a teacher in this school for 43 years, Thomas said. "Some of you probably had parents who were his students. He wasn't famous. He didn't win awards or make a lot of money. But he changed lives by showing up, by caring, and by being present for people who needed him. The students were quiet, listening in a way teenagers rarely listened. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something before we spend a year together learning about contracts and torts and business regulations. Those things are fine. They're useful. But they're not what's going to matter at the end of your life. What's going to matter is whether you were there for the people who needed you. Whether you paid attention. Whether you chose connection over achievement when the two were in conflict." He paused, looking at each of them. you're going to be tempted to believe that success looks like money and titles and recognition. Our whole culture tells you that. But I'm here to tell you something different. Success is being able to look back on your life and know that you were present for it. That you didn't miss it while you were busy planning for it. One student raised her hand. But don't we need to be successful to survive? To pay bills and stuff? Absolutely, Thomas said. I'm not telling you to be irresponsible or avoid ambition. I'm telling you to be intentional about what you're ambitious for. Make sure you're chasing things that actually matter to you, not just things that look impressive to other people. And make sure that in your race to achieve, you don't sacrifice the relationships and moments that give life meaning. Another student asked, "Do you regret your career? Being a lawyer?" Thomas considered that. No. I learned a lot. I grew. But I regret how I did it. I regret treating it like it was more important than everything else. I regret missing 9 years with my father because I was too busy, too proud, and too convinced that my work mattered more than he did. I can't get those years back. But I can make sure you don't make the same mistake. That evening, Thomas did what had become his evening ritual. He sat in his father's chair, watched the light fade, and wrote in the journal he'd started keeping. Following in his father's footsteps in this, too. Year 1 is ending, he wrote. I've been home for a full year now. Teaching. Living in this house. Being part of this community. And I finally understand what Dad was trying to tell me all along. It's not that achievement doesn't matter. It's that it's not enough. You can build an incredible career and still live a small life if you're not connecting with people, if you're not present, if you're always racing toward the next thing. Dad built what looked like a small life from the outside. But it was actually vast, vast in the ways that count. Hundreds of students who remember him. Neighbors who counted on him. A son who, despite everything, was loved unconditionally and persistently even when he didn't deserve it. I came home too late to tell him I understood. It's too late to apologize properly. Too late for one more conversation, one more Sunday dinner, one more chance to just sit together and watch the birds. But I'm not too late to live differently going forward. I'm not too late to choose presence over productivity, connection over achievement, and being over doing. I'm not too late to become the kind of person Dad already believed I was. I miss him every single day. But I also feel closer to him now than I did when he was alive, because I'm finally living in a way that honors what he tried to teach me. The sun came home too late. But maybe it's never too late to finally understand. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to choose what matters. Thomas closed the journal and looked out the window. The street was quiet, lights glowing warm in neighboring windows. Somewhere down the block, he could hear children laughing. A dog barked. Life is happening in its small, persistent, beautiful way. His phone sat on the table beside him, silent. He'd stopped checking it compulsively months ago. There would be time for emails tomorrow, if they mattered. Tonight was for this, for stillness, for reflection, for being present in this moment, in this house, in this life he was building one intentional choice at a time. In the kitchen, his father's coffee mug, the world's best dad mug, sat clean and ready for tomorrow morning. Thomas used it every day now, a small way of keeping his father close, of remembering. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar and comforting. It no longer felt like his father's house. It felt like home. Like the place where Thomas Bennett had finally stopped running, stopped chasing, stopped trying to prove something, and simply started being. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Thomas watched them emerge one by one, patient and unhurried, taking their appointed places. Everything in its time. Everything in its season. He thought about tomorrow. He'd grade papers in the morning, meet a friend for lunch, stop by the library to see Sarah, and maybe work in the garden his father had tended for decades. Small things. Ordinary things. Things that wouldn't show up on a resume or impress anyone. But they were his things. His life. Actually lived, not just planned or anticipated or worked toward. He was 48 years old. He'd wasted more years than he cared to count. But he had years left, God willing, and he intended to live them differently. Present, connected, attentive, grateful. The way his father had tried to teach him. The way his father had always lived. Thomas stood slowly, stretched, and walked to the window one last time. His reflection looked back at him, older now, with gray at the temples and lines around the eyes. But softer too. Less driven by anxiety, less desperate to prove. He thought about writing a final entry in his journal, something profound about time and regret and redemption. But the truths he'd learned weren't complicated enough to require many words. They were simple, really. Almost embarrassingly simple. Time doesn't wait. Love requires presence. Achievement without connection is just accomplishment, impressive but cold. And you can spend your whole life building a ladder to the sky only to realize too late that the life you wanted was always at ground level, waiting for you to simply stop climbing and look around. His father had known that. Had tried to tell him. Had written it in journals and letters and lived it every day of his 43 years in this house, in this town, in this modest but meaningful life. Thomas had come home too late to thank him. But it's not too late to finally understand. It's not too late to live differently. It's not too late to become the son his father always believed he could be. The doors we think will always be open don't stay open forever, and the people we assume will always be there, waiting for us to finally have time, won't wait forever either. We spend our lives climbing ladders, chasing achievements, and building impressive careers, believing that success will finally make us feel complete. But in the race to become someone important, we often miss the quiet truth, that being present for the people who love us, showing up for ordinary moments, and choosing connection over achievement, that's what actually matters. Your father, your mother, your child, your friend, they don't need you to be successful. They just need you to be there. Before the door closes. Before time runs out. Before you come home and realize you're 3 days too late.